everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. Well, something a little bit different this week. I'm here with Richard Hill, who's in Sydney.
Yeah, hello, everybody.
Jonathan Wills, who's from Brisbane.
Hello.
And Karen Ferry, who's down in Melbourne. Hi, Karen.
Hi, how you going?
Now, we thought it would be fun because just to just gather around together and have a chat, have a conversation, and let you guys in on what we're talking about. And today, we thought we'd talk about education and neuroscience. And as we've been sort of talking before the show, we sort of see this theme of educating the educators sort of bubbling to the surface. So that's what we're going to have a bit of a chat about. And Richard, we're on a bit of a roll here, aren't we, when it comes to education? Because we've had Dr. David Collins last week talking about his Brain Grow program, and now we have another great educator of the educators, Karen Ferry, with us, and also Jonathan, who has also been educating educators at a tertiary level as well. So
yeah. Yes, but I think it's great, Matt, because what we're doing is exactly what I think we need to do when we're discussing items, is look at it from not only very different perspectives, but also look at it from nuanced perspectives. I mean, when we were talking to David, we were talking about educating children, utilising the educators and sort of semi-educating as we go. But then we're also talking just about what Karen's doing, that Jonathan's doing, and certainly some of what we're doing through the Science of Psychotherapy magazine and online programs, is saying this is something you need to know. And if you're an educator, you need to be educated as best you can, and we're missing a bit. So this is one of the bits that I'm sure there are some other specialists who would have those thoughts. So I'm really keen to see what Karen and Jonathan have to say about the ease, the difficulty, the pleasures, the pains that are being incurred, the acceptance and the non-acceptance. There's a bunch of stuff that I really want to hear. So I'll shut up now. That'll help. Okay.
Now, before we jump in, most of our listeners will have heard Karen speak before, and she's been in the magazine. Jonathan, who has also been in our magazine in the past, but I don't think you've been on the show before, Jonathan. So, do you want to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure, yeah. I don't think I've actually been on the podcast before.
No.
My name's Jonathan Wills. I work as the secretary to the International Association of Applied Neuroscience, which was commenced actually a couple of years ago by the late Professor Peter Rosso. It was originally the International Association of Clinical Neuropsychotherapy, but has now evolved, I guess, into a wider appeal association, which of course includes a whole sector in addition to the helping professions in the clinical field, in the educational field. So that's and of course part of the reason Karen is here today is through our joint learnings from Professor Peter Rosso and our involvement in the association. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And thank you very much for having me on the show.
Wonderful. I'm glad that you can be here, and we've got a long history together. We've sort of done some of the same, postgrad coursework before, and we're jointly, we've actually written coursework and for postgraduates as well together. So we've very much been tracking along the same path. So it's great to have you here, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Karen, what has been happening in your world? What have you been doing?
Well, I've had the privilege, Matthew, of working with educators. I have my own counselling practice. I work with students and children as well as parents. But some of the best times have been working with teachers in school PD situations where they are wanting to know the stuff. And I always go in wondering how much they know and a little bit maybe nervous that I'm going to be giving them the same drill they've heard for a few years now, but there's always something they take out of it. And it's changing lives, Matthew. It's changing, but it's not actually what you know, it's what you do with what you know.
Right.
Like
yes.
we can educate the educator, which we've all been talking about. We're all on the same page there. But what does the teacher actually do with that? How does it change a teacher's behaviour? You can know the knowledge. So my role, having been an educator for many, many years, is actually to put the meat around the knowledge with, this is what you'll see in your classroom, this is how it'll present with the students, this is a reaction you may get from a parent, and work through from the neuroscience perspective what's happening inside the brain, and giving them really concrete strategies of how to deal with either behaviour problems, parent issues, even staff colleague problems. So it's not just the knowledge, it's the application of the knowledge.
Now, we've been talking about neuroscience in education for a while now. So do you have an opportunity to go back to schools and see, if that sort of knowledge is being applied in a practical way? Are you seeing the fruit of what you've been teaching or what other people have been teaching?
Well, because I've moved down from Queensland in the last 18 months down to Melbourne, I haven't gone back to the original schools in Queensland where I started.
Right.
I know in the last couple of weeks, after a couple of PDs I've done with schools down here, I've had the principals phone me and say we're seeing a big difference in the way the staff are interacting with the students now. So they were very much on board with the great, we've been needing this. We have all these amazing curriculum programs. We have in Victoria, I don't know if it's in Queensland, the PB for L, which is Positive Behaviour for Learning behaviour program. Mm-hmm. But there's always a 20% or maybe an 8%, between 8 and 20% of kids that don't really respond to the normal discipline routines of a school. And we're finding that the kids that don't respond well are kids that probably have suffered trauma in their childhood. And so normal discipline methods aren't working because they see it as attacking. Their brain is not even down-regulated enough to know that we're trying to help them. So it's giving the teachers extra strategies for that. And that's the stuff that the principals are saying, yeah, we're finally getting some ideas on how to handle those really difficult students in schools. We have a huge majority, but there's always kids at both ends of how do we do those ones? How do we handle those parents that are really agitated every time they come into a school? How do we handle the gifted and talented kid that doesn't want to learn anymore because it's more cool to be cool than to actually be intelligent?
Okay, so there's a vital role for educating the educators in the neuroscience of, how the brain works, as opposed to, well, we should just intuitively understand what to do with these sort of children, I'm guessing.
Well, I mean, yeah, this is the thing. I mean, this is actually the message that's coming through it, is that what we have been doing and the systems that we've put in place have not been based on intuitive or interrelating interpersonal states, and I think this is very true. The argument can be that schools, as we have them structured over the last 100, 200 years, actually doesn't have a naturalness to it at all. It's entirely unnatural. It's moved in from the outside. It's moved in from directly purposeful education in your skill or your family tradition, and it's moved into educating people in long-term outcomes. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on, and that lovely word that Karen used in there, that we have this discipline and people aren't working to discipline. So there's fascinating words that we have in education that were never really founded on functional aspects of human beings, but more functional aspects of what we want education to achieve from a social point of view. And this is, I think, a lot of what we're shifting. And Jonathan, I imagine this type of aspect of looking at what people think is desirable human behaviour and actually what is natural or more naturally understandable human behaviour is some of the stuff that you've looked at a lot.
Well, I wouldn't say a lot necessarily, but it's what you're saying there reminds me of Sir Ken Robinson's take on the educational structures that we have. We're designed and conceived when you think about it, in the mid 18th century. So, before then, there wasn't really a structured educational system at all. He does a really good animation of, rethinking educational paradigms, which is through the RSA, the Royal Society for the Promotion of the Arts in the UK. But he does a really good animation, which is on YouTube, talking about this very issue, talking about how our educational system is failing our children because it's outmoded, it's outdated. It's not focusing, as you say, Richard, on those interpersonal skills, those interpersonal attributes, but more on pushing children through in a batch system through the educational system in order to produce sort of graduates, coming out the end, newly minted, newly stamped, date stamped with their age, etc., for the purposes, ostensibly, of fulfilling roles in society, whether it be for corporations or government, other types of roles. But the whole system needs to be kind of rethought and, I guess, opened up.
Well, see, I don't have a problem with the turning kids out with education, because there's a big need for curriculum development, good, solid education to give the kids the grounding for workplace employment. But for me, in my experience, it's been how we have done that. Now, when I first got out to teaching in the early 1980s, there was a lot of corporal punishment still. And we were told you don't make friends with the students. You're hard and you're cruel on them, basically, to get the respect you need so you can then have a quiet classroom for the rest of the year. Now, we know from the brain science that that is not the way to teach. That is more. So the curriculum-based stuff, we have to have that solid base. But what I'm liking now that I'm seeing is that teachers are realising that the fear-based learning, which is what we talked about when we did the learning together at the adult education at Christian Heritage College, Jonathan, that the fear-based learning just doesn't work. And no matter what the curriculum is, if it's done from a fear-based brain, we're just going to get a lot of kids that haven't learned but also don't know how to interact with society, which is what you're getting at.
I agree.
Just quickly, we've got some stuff in the next issue of the magazine from Rita Princey talking about that. So everybody get in and read that. Sorry, Jonathan, jump on.
I was going to say, I think the point is that it has worked for some people. The fear-based system, some people who are adapting to that environment and responding to that environment in a positive way, do succeed. I mean, we can't say that the educational system as is and how we've inherited it, how it's evolved, has not been good for everyone. It's true. There are a lot of people who it doesn't work for. Probably the vast majority of people who are labelled non-academic. And of course, that's part of the problem of the system the way it is. It sort of creates these two streams. Either you're adapted to it, you do well in it, you're academic, or you're not. And that's part of the problem, because there are plenty of people, and we all have met them in our lives, brilliant people, people who are extremely good at what they do, but they don't have a degree. They don't have formal qualifications, and they haven't responded well to our current educational paradigm. And yet they are brilliant at what they do. I mean, you want to take a look at some of the biggest entrepreneurs in the world now who failed academically, but went on to thrive in the environment in which they found themselves in, precisely because they were focused on what it was that they wanted to achieve, their own imagination. They had a very strong sense of self, and that presumably must have come through their parents and their peer groups, not necessarily from the schools where they failed.
Yeah, and I think the system, the education system, as you say, Jonathan, was for the Industrial Revolution. It was to produce cookie cutter people, to drive machines and to drive industry forward. Probably has served us well, for the Industrial Revolution and for a good part of the 20th century. But for the 21st century, we're now entering into another revolution, a technology revolution, and the cookie cutter people that we were producing for the Industrial Revolution now they're not going to be be able to find a job because we have robotic systems, automated systems, artificial intelligence systems that will be able to do that better, faster, cheaper. And so what we need is an education system that will produce the individual who is attuned, with more, things like in the arts, and, thinking outside the box, and more creative kind of thinking, which comes down to much more individualistic kind of person that we want to nurture and produce, and let the machines do the stuff that we were trying to produce people to do in the Industrial Revolution. But we need a different type of person to come out the other end of our education system, I believe.
Yeah, Ken Robinson describes these people as having high-level divergent thinking.
Yes.
So that he gives an example in that little animation I was referring to earlier, where he talks about primary school kids who are given an assessment about divergent thinking. And divergent thinking is about, looking at multiple ways of solving a particular problem. So these very young children come out as genius level when they're tested when they're very young. But then if you go back to the same cohort and test them at sort of, 9 and 10 years old and 15 and 16 years old, they become effectively dumbed down.
Right.
And of course, what that is that's education.
Right.
So they start very young with this incredible capacity, and everyone has it. 98% or so of young children have this divergent thinking capacity, this way of thinking about problems which is sort of outside the box. But as they go through the educational system, it's sort of effectively drummed out of them, so that by the time they're sort of getting ready for the workforce at maybe 17, 18, that capacity has kind of been blasted out of them somehow.
Reframed or redirected. And this is the interesting thing at the moment is that we're in a state of flux. We're in a state of a phase shift, probably, and it's been going on for a little while and go on for a little while longer. So the moving from one system to the other, because now, of course, there's this huge enthusiasm about being an entrepreneur. Just do what you love and go and do it. And I heard a lovely comedian the other day, and she said, "I'm on dating sites and I've discovered that entrepreneur means no money." So that's not. So we're having a flux between going into the system, bucking the system, this type of aspect of divergent thinking, of its usefulness, and the trouble is that there was a time in society when it wasn't useful to have that. For society, great for people, but unfortunately for society. And I mean, this all sort of comes into my curiosity stuff that I work on of the importance of being able to see multiple elements of things in order to find what is meaningful for yourself. So this restraint of divergence enables people to more likely choose the society that we have as being the best choice. And this goes broadly in some of the Western cultures, but also very nefariously in some of the other cultural education systems. So there's also this idea that we are dealing with a change and a state of shift, and that's when we need more information. Mm-hmm. And this is what you're doing, Karen.
Yeah. Can I just say, when it comes to sort of very young people, there's this great neural proliferation across the cortex. There's a lot of diversity, divergence, maybe even in neural connections. And then it's through what I'm hearing is it's through our education system that we're deliberately pruning a lot of those. We're effectively creating this neural architecture. We're pruning away certain connections that were possibilities, but once they're pruned away, they are no longer possibilities. And so we are conforming, like literally conforming physical brains according to the education system. And so we lose the capacity to a great degree for that divergent thinking that, Jonathan, you were saying is evident in young people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sorry, Karen, yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say, so the other point that is important to consider here, where conformity is a move towards this standardized testing that we've seen in a lot of curricula, not just in Australia, but also, in the UK and possibly in America. I'm not sure about America, but this standardization of educational, cookie cutter, you mentioned early on, was a good phrase. And of course, one of the corollaries of that is that it's not going to fit for everyone. And there's always going to be a certain population within the school and amongst the school children of those who effectively are saying, this isn't for me, this doesn't work. And they're faced in today's society with this massive of stimulus from all sorts of areas, for whether it's social media, hundreds of TV channels, etc. And they're effectively distracted from what they're being taught in schools, which is, learn your times tables. You need to know this in order to get a job. And that promise, of course, do well at school, get your educational qualifications, and then you'll get a job. That promise has gone out the window some decades ago.
Right.
So it's just not fit for purpose anymore.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, Karen, Save School. We're doing away with school now. So,
well, it's interesting because I can speak from a teacher's perspective because I've worked in the classrooms, involved with many schools over the years, and this all sounds great. But in the practical applications of how you actually do that, this is where the real challenge is. Because there are certain things that children need to know, and Jonathan mentioned the times tables. Now, one kid can say, I don't want to learn the times tables, and should he be able to go and do something else instead of? This is the dilemma that teachers are faced against, and that's just a very simple, basic example. So when you walk through a school campus, teachers are stressed. Teachers are overloaded with work. Teachers are expected to not only be educators today, but counsellors, but sounding boards for parents. The paperwork is horrendous. So as much as the change of how we learn would be totally agreed upon through, I'm sure, all school systems, it's coming across the perfect blend of how that can actually look for individual schools, because every school is unique in the students they attract. And also, how do we then not overload the teachers even more? Because to cater to 25 little beings in their classrooms now, and then all individual styles of learning, which they all try and do now, but then go, well, let's just add another little layer onto this. This is why I think we've come at these very almost robotic set ways of teaching, simply because we have large classes, we don't have extra assistants, we have kids that are discipline problems, we have learning, we have psychological problems maybe, and a teacher goes home frazzled. So when we talk curriculum and change and how schools have failed kids, we've also got to remember that from the educator's perspective, they're doing their darndest in many areas.
Right. So partly the way that the system runs probably has a great deal to do with resourcing. I mean, if our schools had one teacher for every 5 children, I'm sure that we could tailor to individuality to the nth degree, right?
Well, even less. I mean, 1-to-1 is the ideal, isn't it, for every individual need? But, and then because you have 1 to 5 and then get one child that doesn't actually want to do what the 1 and 5 are doing, you're still taken away from the group. So it's a lot more complex. To me, it's not so much about even changing the entire system. It's how we approach the learning we've even got. We have the set curriculum, we have to do the NAPLAN test, it's all part of what the Australian government's done, and we're all going along with that. We have the fors and against for NAPLAN testing and standardised testing. But for what I see, it's how a teacher delivers, how a teacher responds to student needs, how a teacher engages the classroom. It doesn't matter the curriculum. for me, it's all about the teacher and the teacher approach.
Yeah, so you've got. It's great to talk about the ideals and the things we should or shouldn't have done, but now it's really a matter of getting into where we're at, what we need to do now, what is functional in our society, which we may or may not agree with, but it is the way it functions, and to how best get that function functioning. And I think that I get that, and that's right. And so one of the things that going back to where we started, and then we sort of wandered off into how else can we do it, and I think that was reasonable, but it's how can we best do what we are doing now? What is the information that's missing? And one of the things that does definitely seem to be missing is an understanding of how the brain is working and how it can inform people so much more in why people are doing what they're doing to improve the responses. I mean, I'm a great believer in responsive work. So how can you respond successfully to something if you don't understand it?
Well, that's exactly right. Can I just add a little bit more here? When you have a teacher that understands that a raised, high, screechy voice yelling instructions is heightening a child's brain and they're going to basically turn the other way, just that knowledge can be enough for them to settle and settle their brain. And so then learning becomes more pleasurable and they'll want to learn even if it's more difficult. So yes, what you're saying, Richard, is right on the knocker for me in my experience. It's to get the understanding there so we can start to make changes from within. Even if we can't do the big changes yet, let's do the small changes from within each classroom.
And, Karen, you talked about teachers are having to try and be counsellors these days. Well, I think on reflection, I think many of us will find if we stop and think about the best teachers that we had as children in our own experience, that they had those skills, right? They had those empathic attunement capacity.
Yes.
That, even without necessarily the knowledge, the neuroscience knowledge behind it, there was an intuitive character to some of the best teachers that we've had in our lifetimes. And I think what we're seeing now is effectively a recognition of how those characteristics of the best teachers can be passed on and broadened and heightened so that all teachers can, if they pick up that some of the neuroscience and, like you say, put it into practice, can improve those empathic attunement skills, as Siegel would probably describe it, and therefore get a much better result from the children they're interacting with. My sister is a teacher, or has been a teacher for most of her life, an award-winning teacher, actually. And one of the things that she talks about is when she's dealing with difficult kids, or kids who have difficulty, engaging, that she always makes sure the eye contact is there when it comes to actually effectively kind of snapping them out of an affect where they're disengaged and they're maybe just even disruptive. But that eye contact and that empathic attunement, that down-regulation of anxious or stressful affect is the first step in order to bring control back into the classroom.
Yeah, and now we know that's stimulating ventral vagal.
That's right.
Now we get this understanding. And just quickly, Karen, I only got to say something, but it's just pertinent. When I did a master's in education, in amongst the plethora of fun things that I did, but it wasn't too far ago, maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago. Anyway, my thesis for the master's was the neuroscience of education. And I did a variety of things. I looked at a lot of documentaries and films for the data of successful teaching methods. Anyway, so I put this forward, and the response was, "That's very interesting, Richard. We're really looking forward to seeing the paper, but we're actually not sure what we can do because we don't have anyone who can mark it." And that was really interesting. So we have nobody in our professorial team that has an understanding of neuroscience beyond this strange man who came along and was playing around with it. So that was 10 years ago. So I think we're further down the track now, by the sounds of things.
Yes, I would hope so.
Yeah, but with Karen going out and teaching these places, and principals are very interested in this stuff, Karen, in the stuff being presented. Yeah.
The problem is it's when you go to a school, there's always extra PDs they need to do, and so once you get them on board and once you get teachers in the room and explain it, they really see that it's quite relevant. But they've all had snippets of it along for the last 10 years, as you say. They've had snippets about the brain, but to understand the actual dynamics, and I just want to pick up on what Jonathan was saying with his sister, eye contact. I believe eye contact down to their level and speak in the lowest tone possible, and you certainly just down-regulate that limbic system. But for teachers also that are busy, there is something about preparation. Teachers that prepare, this is a way that I believe we can counteract some of the stress that teachers go through. If we're talking to teachers in this recording, teachers that aren't prepared are going to be more stressed themselves because they aren't able to manage the numerous interruptions that happen in the day in a classroom. So when they are down-regulated, when their limbic system is in control, they are going to have more time to interact, as Jonathan suggested, with each student, get to know each kid. If you're busily running off to the photocopier or quickly answering that you haven't got enough paper for this or that, and kids are being naughty and you're just disciplining all the time, there is no time for actual interaction with a student to get to know them. So preparation through the holiday period, through the Christmas breaks, it's not about adding to the work, it's being teacher smart and work smart. To simply go into a classroom prepared and not stressed, because my stress as a teacher is going to definitely play off with my mirror neurons to their mirror neurons, the stress, how I'm feeling. And that is a huge thing that teachers understand their personal impact as soon as they walk into a classroom. But what do we get? Put your homework there, stand behind your chairs, sit down, too much talking, we're ready to start class. And that kids off on edge right from the beginning of the day. Yep. There are different ways to begin a day, and then we can take time through the day to sit beside kids and just see how they're going and get to know them.
And that's from, that's talking about probably a fairly well self-regulated teacher. And certainly my kids have come home and talked about, different teachers that have they've obviously come to the end of their tether. They've just completely lost it and just launch into, a rage basically and terrify every kid in the class. Obviously if you get to that point, surely you're better, I don't know, walking out and taking 5 or something.
Well, because it's very hard to come back from that, Matthew. Once you lose that, or once you lose your cool in a classroom and you've become more or less the joke, it's very hard to claw back some semblance of respect. So if teachers can down-regulate by the breathing techniques, by making sure they're fit and healthy with exercise incorporated in their day and doing things for their own well-being and wellness, then hopefully they won't get to that point of losing it uncontrollably, which is so detrimental for the respect that they're trying to earn in a classroom. Do you think teachers generally understand that their mental state is going to have a direct effect on the mental state of the kids that are in front of them? Well, I certainly tell them. That's part of my presentations. We talk about BDNF production, how we need good sleep, how we need, good lots of exercise, good, healthy, nutritious food, avoid too much alcohol, things that actually keep their BDNF production up there. Because if they have good BDNF production with cortisol counteracting means, they're definitely going to have a better frame of mind to be more tolerant. Kids are kids, and we seem to become intolerant of some of their kid behaviours. And I think we need to sort of maybe ease up. And I, for one, I wish I taught differently in many of the classrooms I taught in. This is no perfect teacher talking here. This is the teacher that's made lots of mistakes and learned from mistakes. And now the brain science is there. I go, wow, I wish I knew then what I knew now, and I'd like to start my career all over again because of the knowledge of the brain science.
Yeah. Having been a teacher yourself, do teachers have good access to counsellors, to help?
It's funny because they would have access. I think there will be EAP things in place, but lots of them are just say, I'm too busy, haven't got time for that. I do personally counsel teachers. It's part of the EAP work that I do.
Okay.
But it's rare because teachers are fixers. And if I can't fix myself, there must be something wrong with me, but I don't want to talk about it. Because that's what we do. We fix problems all day as a teacher.
I did a surprising amount of counselling when I was doing my master's degree with Joe, and I wasn't going the education system, but it was really quite interesting. I spent a lot of time talking to people who were working teachers just doing this additional master's degree, and I should have charged. Yeah. Anyway. But I was doing a lot, which only goes to, I'm saying that not so much, hooray for Richard. It's more that they were seeking out the services of some guy who was in their university course to get some counselling because they had some time, because they were away on this residential. So they were accessing somebody who wasn't really suitable, for them, but was something. So that's interesting that, as you say that, I just reflect on that.
It seems to me that any community that is, teachers they're at the coalface, they're the most important person modulating the next generation coming up, shaping the next generation, that we shouldn't have some pretty good support in place, not for the teachers, of course, but indirectly for that next generation, because the counselling and the support that the teacher gets has a indirect or maybe a direct correspondence with the mental health of our next generation.
Definitely.
Yeah. And financial stresses. I mean, Australia's not so bad. America, I know in some places has great difficulty, teachers having, other jobs to supplement themselves. You get into some other countries in Europe, and some teachers are highly regarded. Sometimes it's not. There's a real uneven distribution of social appreciation of teachers worldwide. You go to the Netherlands and Scandinavia and some of those places, and of course they're up on a fabulous pedestal. So it, in the sense of socially considered and regarded. It's interesting that it is so diverse across cultures, even in the first world.
And on that point, Richard, sorry, Richard, to cut you off. On that point, if a teacher is not feeling valued within the school system, if they're being underpaid, if they haven't got money for resources, using money from their own pocket to buy things for the kids, then there is a difficulty even in drumming up enough enthusiasm to be able to get through a day. So you put behaviour issues in with that. So yes, the Scandinavian countries where they are highly regarded, their teachers are fired up and enthusiastic, and they'll take the kids to great lengths. But you get some of the smaller schools where a teacher might be overloaded, but there's no extra support, and use their own money to buy stuff for whatever. There's going to be a lot more, I'm not going to use the word resentment, but there is going to be a difficulty in drumming the same enthusiasm to feel valued enough to really put 100% into your job, because it's just tiring and so thankless. You get complaints galore, the parent complaints, administrative complaints. They're so quick to complain to teachers about what they're doing wrong. I think as part of our neuroscience with teachers and principals is to recognise that those important roles, as Matthew has pointed out, need to be affirmed. We need to have that self-esteem enhancement. We need to feel valued within our jobs. And then we may get more out of the teacher, and the fact that they're feeling that this is really a great position to be in.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you're talking about self-esteem enhancement, going back to the neuropsychotherapy model, the feeling of being valued, I think can't be overstated. When you're talking about, it doesn't even have to be monetary necessarily. Like you mentioned, Richard, when a profession is highly regarded in a society, then I think that can be sufficient. It doesn't necessarily have to be associated with a higher salary. if teachers feel valued and they feel as though their input is really having a beneficial effect on the upbringing of the children under their watch, then I think that can be sufficient. But they do have to, like you say, feel as though that helps with their own growth and their own self-esteem, and hence the need to meet those basic needs.
So teachers are actually in this education, Karen and Jonathan and Matt, because I know you do this as well. They're actually learning about their own brains.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's pretty helpful too, isn't it? Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, Richard, I'm just conscious of the time, so I just, Jonathan, Karen, anything you'd like to sort of finish up with as we finish this conversation?
Well, I'd just like to reminisce a little bit. I mean, Matt and Karen, you'll both probably remember this, but I remember attending lectures with Peter Rosso, and one of the things I always found very reassuring and really feeling quite safe as a result, he would often say at the beginning of a lecture, "Now, I'm not going to ask anyone or put anyone on the spot." And there's a sense of immense relief. And I think, I'm sure if that's happening in schools and in classrooms, Karen, that's the first step to create a safe environment where kids are going to feel, able to respond and engage without the fear that they're going to be picked on or someone's going to point at them or ask them a question in front of everyone.
And that really is giving them the sense of control, which is another one of those basic needs, that they have options. Because I do believe that children do need to be asked directly questions, or you get two or three that answer in the class and the rest will just wallow away and go, we don't have to even pay attention here. But it's when they're demanded to answer, when there is a punishment associated with them not answering correctly, when they're made to feel humiliated and shamed or embarrassed, that's when it becomes a problem. Sure. So yes, what you have talked about, Jonathan, that's very, very pertinent and very right. But teachers can develop strategies to ask a child a question without demeaning them in a way that they will want to keep answering and want to learn and keep curious, basically.
Okay.
Yes, and for my just last words is, of course, going to my word curiosity. This not just curiosity for just learning information, but curiosity for what things mean to us. And there's, besides the intuitive awareness, but also there's some good research showing that fear and anger and curiosity can't really share the same space, that their negative works on each other, and you move away from this fear-based system, and then your curiosity gets permission to peek up over the rise, and that is the biggest thing that is got in my mind to return to education, is just the sheer fascination of information rather than the requirement of information. And understanding the brain is a really great way for teachers and students to move forward on this. This is a great discussion. Yeah, I loved it.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Richard. And thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Karen.
Welcome.
Thank you.
A pleasure.
Okay.